They say marriage is built on trust, on shared laughter, quiet mornings, and promises that last a lifetime. For years I believed that. I truly did. When I first met Daniel, he was everything I thought I wanted. Charming, attentive, funny in that easy, natural way that made me feel like I was the only one who mattered. He'd bring me coffee just the way I liked it, 2 sugars, a dash of cream, and call me his lucky star. We'd dance in the kitchen to old songs, burn dinner, laugh until we cried, and then order takeout because neither of us could cook to save our lives. People would tell me how perfect we looked together. I used to smile and agree, believing I'd found the kind of love that could weather anything. I was the doting wife, supportive, patient, always putting his needs first. I took pride in that. I thought that's what love meant, giving more than you take. But love can be deceiving. It can wear a mask so convincing that even when it starts to slip, you convince yourself you imagined it. It began subtly. A late-night phone call here, a work trip there. At first, I brushed it off. He had a demanding job, long hours, constant meetings. That's what I told myself. That's what he told me. But the signs kept stacking up. The faint scent of perfume that wasn't mine. The way he'd silence his phone the second I walked into the room. The shift in his tone when he said, "I love you." It used to sound warm, now it sounded like punctuation, something said out of habit, not feeling I remember one night so clearly. We were sitting on the couch, a movie playing in the background. I leaned my head on his shoulder the same way I always did, but he stiffened, like my touch suddenly felt foreign. My heart sank, but I said nothing. I just sat there, pretending everything was fine while inside. Something small and fragile cracked. It's funny how quickly the perfect marriage can start to feel like a performance. You keep smiling for the audience, friends, family, social media, while backstage, everything's falling apart. I'd wake up early to make him breakfast, still hoping maybe things would go back to how they used to be. He'd eat in silence, eyes glued to his phone. No smile, no warmth, just distance. And yet, I couldn't stop loving him. Or maybe I just couldn't stop loving who he used to be. Every night, I'd lie awake next to him, listening to his breathing, wondering if he was dreaming of someone else. I'd trace the outline of my wedding ring with my thumb, and think about how easily gold can lose its shine when the heart behind it starts to fade. At first, I blamed myself. Maybe I wasn't fun enough. Maybe I'd gotten too busy, too distracted. I started dressing up more, cooking his favorite meals, leaving little notes in his briefcase like I used to. But none of it worked. He'd smile politely, thank me, then go right back to his phone. It wasn't until much later that I realized you can't fix what someone doesn't want to fix. You can't fight for someone who's already chosen to let go. But at that time, I was still trapped in the illusion. The perfect wife in the perfect marriage. Holding on, pretending, waiting for a miracle that would never come. I didn't know it yet, but those quiet nights, those tiny cracks, they were just the beginning, because soon the mask would fall completely, and the truth would change everything. It's strange how the smallest things start to feel like earthquakes once your heart begins to doubt. A new cologne, a sudden change in routine. The tiniest details start screaming at you, even when you try to silence them. At first, I told myself I was overthinking. He'd always been busy, right? Long meetings, late-night projects, deadlines that couldn't wait. That's what successful men do. That's what I used to tell my friends proudly. He works so hard for us. But lately, work had started sounding like a wall between us, something he could hide behind. He began coming home later than usual, sometimes hours after he said he would. And when he finally walked in, his shirt untucked and his smile forced, I could feel something heavy in the air, a tension that didn't belong in our home. He'd kiss me on the forehead, quick and distracted, then rush to the shower before I could even ask how his day went. One night, I caught a whiff of something unfamiliar. Sweet, floral, not my scent. It clung to his collar, faint but undeniable. I remember freezing, the room spinning for a moment. I laughed it off. Maybe someone at the office hugged him. Maybe it was nothing. But deep down, my stomach twisted with the truth I didn't want to name. He started guarding his phone like it was made of gold. He used to leave it on the kitchen counter. Now it was always in his pocket or face down on the table. When it buzzed, he'd flinch. Sometimes he'd smile quietly to himself before typing back a quick message. I wanted to ask, I wanted to scream, but I didn't. Instead, I turned away, busying myself with dishes, with laundry, with anything that kept my hands occupied and my mind from unraveling. It's a painful thing, the moment you start doubting someone you love. You start questioning everything, even yourself. Was I not enough? Had I changed? Was I imagining things? One evening, while we were having dinner, his phone lit up on the table. A woman's name flashed across the screen. He grabbed it before I could read the full text, his movements just a little too quick. I smiled, or tried to. "Who was that?" I asked softly. He looked up, smiled back, but his eyes were cold. "Work," he said simply. Then he changed the topic. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying that moment over and over, the way he smiled, the way he lied. Denial is a strange kind of comfort. It lets you pretend that everything is fine, that the world you built isn't falling apart. But every lie you swallow chips away a little more of your soul. I began noticing more things: new clothes I didn't buy, expensive cologne that appeared out of nowhere, sudden business trips that weren't on his calendar. He'd start arguments over small things, just to storm out and leave the house for hours. And yet, every morning, I'd still make him breakfast, still kiss him goodbye, still pretend. Because the truth terrified me. I wasn't ready to see my marriage for what it had become. I wasn't ready to admit that the man I once trusted with my whole heart was slowly slipping away, not by accident, but by choice. I kept telling myself it was a phase, that he was stressed, that things would get better. I clung to every "I love you" like it was proof that I was wrong, that maybe I was just paranoid. But in my heart, I knew. Something was changing, something was breaking, and soon it wouldn't just be cracks beneath the surface, the whole thing would shatter. Sleep became a stranger to me. Every night I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, listening for the sound of his key in the door. Sometimes he'd come home past midnight, sometimes not at all. And when he did, he smelled like someone else's perfume. Faint but sharp, the kind that clung to him even after a shower. I stopped asking where he'd been, because every time I did, it turned into an argument. "Why do you always assume the worst?" he'd snap. "I'm working hard for us, and all you do is accuse me." But his voice didn't sound like guilt. It sounded like annoyance, like I'd interrupted something more important. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I'd spent hours sitting in the dark, waiting for him, heart pounding, phone in hand. When the headlights finally swept across the driveway, I felt a strange calm wash over me, the kind of calm that comes right before a storm. He walked in, eyes glazed from exhaustion or maybe guilt. "You're still up?" he said flatly. I didn't answer. I just looked at him. For the first time, really looked. "Who is she?" I asked quietly. He froze, just for a second, then let out a dry laugh. "What are you talking about?" "The perfume," I said. "The messages you hide, the nights you disappear. You think I don't notice?" His expression changed, not to remorse, but to irritation. "You're imagining things, Sarah. You've been so emotional lately. Maybe you should talk to someone." It was like being slapped. He wasn't even trying to deny it convincingly. He was twisting it, turning it back on me. I felt my throat tighten. "Don't you dare make me feel crazy for noticing what's right in front of me." He rolled his eyes. "You're paranoid, insecure. That's your problem, not mine." And just like that, something inside me snapped. I had spent weeks crying in silence, begging the universe to give me a reason to trust him again. But in that moment, I realized he didn't care whether I believed him or not. He just wanted control. My tears stopped, my hands stopped shaking. For the first time in months, I felt still. He mistook my silence for surrender. He kissed my forehead, mumbled something about getting some sleep, and walked away. But inside me, something had shifted. The woman who begged for honesty was gone. In her place stood someone colder, quieter, someone who wasn't going to be fooled again. I watched him from the doorway that night, his back turned to me as he scrolled through his phone. He chuckled softly at something, maybe a message, maybe a memory. And I thought, go ahead. Keep laughing. You have no idea what's coming. The next morning, I didn't cry. I didn't question. I smiled, made his coffee, kissed him goodbye. He looked relieved, as if he'd finally broken me down. But what he didn't know was that I wasn't broken anymore. I was planning. That's the thing about heartbreak. Once it burns everything down, all that's left is clarity. And I was finally starting to see him for who he really was. Soon, he'd see who I really was too. I never planned to find it. I told myself I wouldn't snoop, that I'd wait for him to admit the truth. But some instincts are stronger than patience. Some suspicions refuse to stay buried. That night, my hands moved before my mind caught up. Picking up his phone, swiping through notifications, scanning his messages. At first, it was just words, casual, seemingly innocent messages. But then I saw it. A trail of texts between him and a woman I had never met. Flirty, teasing, intimate. The kind of words you only send when you want to feel something that isn't at home. My hands started trembling. I gripped the phone tighter, afraid it might slip and shatter along with the illusion I had been living in. My heart pounded, but the sound felt distant, like it belonged to someone else. I stared at the screen, frozen, a small, cruel smile forming on my lips, the kind you don't let anyone see. Then came the physical evidence, a lipstick mark on his shirt sleeve, not faint, not accidental. It screamed betrayal in a language no one could deny. I touched it gently, almost reverently, feeling the cold reality of it stain me with both grief and clarity. I remember standing there, holding the evidence and thinking, this is it. This is the truth I had been avoiding. The reality that had been hiding behind his excuses, his charm, his lies. And yet, despite the pain, an eerie calm settled over me. For the first time in months, I wasn't crying, I wasn't shaking, I wasn't begging for explanations. I was watching, calculating, absorbing every detail. This was no longer just about heartbreak. This was about knowing, about seeing, about reclaiming the part of myself he had tried to manipulate into submission. I paused, staring at the phone again, reading the messages one by one. Every flirty remark, every hidden meeting planned in secret, every careless lie. All of it painted a picture so vivid, so undeniable, that denial was impossible. And in that moment, I felt a strange kind of liberation, not happiness, not relief, but a sharp, clear understanding that I was done being the victim, that the tears, the sleepless nights, the fear, all of it had led me here, to a place where I could act with purpose. I folded the shirt carefully, phone still in hand, my lips pressed into a thin line. He would never see this coming. Because now I wasn't just hurt, I wasn't just betrayed, I was ready. The quiet intensity in me had shifted. Heartbreak had been replaced with determination, grief replaced with planning. And with every detail I memorized, every lie I catalogued, the pieces of my revenge began to fall into place. I finally understood something I hadn't before. Betrayal only has power if you let it. And from this moment forward, I wasn't going to let him have any. The perfect marriage I had once believed in was gone. But what I had gained in its place was something stronger, sharper, unstoppable. The first step toward justice, in a way only I could deliver.
Revenge, I decided, would not be a roar. It would be a quiet, perfectly timed whisper. A small thing, done in the right place, that would make the whole house of cards topple. I didn't want a scene that would let him play the wounded hero or make me look petty. I wanted something ironic, poetic, a little absurd, justice served with a crooked smile, so I started watching him like a scientist studies an experiment. Not out of malice alone, but because you can't break what you haven't first understood. I tracked his rhythms, the days he left the house with the same faded jacket, the way he checked his phone at the coffee shop 2 blocks away from our house, the shortcut he took to the parking lot when he was nervous. I learned the times his voice grew light when he lied, and the exact moment he tried to mask a message with work stuff. His patterns were boringly consistent. Tuesdays and Thursdays, late evenings, those were his favorite windows. He preferred bars with dim lighting and booths that gave privacy. He liked places that smelled faintly of cinnamon and laughter, because small comforts make a betrayal feel less like a secret and more like a pleasant little indulgence. He had rituals, a quick text to confirm, a soft laugh at something on the screen, then the hurried pocketing of his phone when someone walked by. I learned her habits too, without ever meeting her. I mapped out the clues he left: a receipt for a late-night cafe, a subtle change in the playlists streaming from his phone, the way he suddenly cared more about looking put together. Each breadcrumb told a story, and I followed them until the path became a map. One afternoon, while cleaning, doing the ordinary chores that let my mind move freely, I found the object that made the whole plan possible. It was on his nightstand, half hidden beneath a stack of magazines, a small, plain bottle of personal lubricant. Seeing it was like watching a punchline appear in slow motion. There it was, mundane and mundane again, a tiny instrument of his private transgressions. I touched the cap with a finger and had to laugh, not because it was funny, but because the idea that rose out of that laugh felt deliciously appropriate. I could have done something loud. I could have packed a bag and left. I could have made calls, posted messages, announced his betrayal to the world, but that wasn't me. I wanted something that would expose him without making me look crazy or weak. I wanted a moment where the truth would be undeniable and the humiliation would belong completely to him, played out on his own messy terms. So the idea formed, ridiculous and precise. What if I took that bottle, that small, intimate symbol of his cheating, and turned it into the instrument of his undoing? Not in a cruel, harmful way, but in a way that fit the absurdity of what he'd done. The thought of replacing the lube with something that looked the same, but acted very differently, felt like theatrical justice. It was petty, sure. It was also perfect. I did my research quietly. I learned what would mimic the appearance and viscosity of the lube without causing lasting harm. I wanted a substitute that would create a scene, one that would be embarrassing, public, and inescapable. I ruled out anything dangerous or illegal. That was not my aim. What I wanted was exposure, a moment where his secrets would be visible, where his choices would no longer be cloaked by darkness or excuses. Preparation required patience and a cool head. I bought a bottle that matched the original, same size, same plain label, and I ordered a substitute that would dry firm and stick, something household safe but utterly inconvenient. I practiced the swap once, twice, until my hands moved like they had done it 1,000 times. Precision mattered. If I fumbled, if I left fingerprints in the wrong places, the whole thing could be traced back to me. So I took precautions. I wore gloves while handling the bottles, wiped any surfaces I touched, and put everything back exactly where it had been. There were smaller, almost comical details to take care of. I made sure the cap clicked the same as the original. I studied how he opened the bottle, the little tilt of his wrist. So the moment would unfold naturally. I chose the brand of the substitute carefully. It needed to look ordinary in the dim light of a motel room or a private corner at a party. The last thing I wanted was for the switch to look staged. Beyond the physical logistics, I rehearsed my expression. This was crucial. If, at any point, I looked triumphant or vindictive in public, people might side with him out of sympathy. So I practiced neutrality, the kind of calm you show when handing someone back a lost item. The act had to be so mundane, so unaffected, that when the chaos unfolded, there would be no hint pointing back at me. As I plotted, A dark little humor began to ease the tightness in my chest. Why should I grieve alone when life itself offered a perfectly ludicrous way to reveal the truth? The image of him struggling, exposed by his own choices, made me smile, a quiet, private smile that felt less like cruelty and more like a reclaiming of myself. I also had to account for the improbable, the firefighters, the crowded embarrassment. I couldn't plan for everything, but I could nudge fate in the direction I wanted. If his usual locations were cramped bars or cheap motels with thin walls, that would help. If his lies were elaborate enough that he'd keep going back despite near misses, that would help even more. It had to look like the natural consequence of his actions, not a trap I'd laid. In the end, the plan was simple. Observe, replace, wait. The simplicity was part of its beauty. It was not about spectacle. It was about truth revealed in the smallest, most inevitable way. I didn't want to destroy him. I wanted to show him, and the world that witnessed him, who he really was. There is a strange power in small things done deliberately. The world treats the tiny as insignificant, but tiny can be ruthless. The lube bottle on his nightstand was a tiny thing, so was my resolve to stop pretending. Both would do their work. As I closed the drawer that night, bottle in hand and heart steady, I told myself one thing. This is not revenge for revenge's sake. This is the end of pretending. This is the moment I stop being invisible in my own life. And if the truth comes wrapped in a ridiculous, sticky package, so be it, I was ready. And that's when I realized how liberating it felt to prepare for revenge, not with rage, but with calm, with precision, with a small, private smile. Because sometimes the quietest moves make the loudest statements. The house was silent, almost unreal in its stillness. I lay in bed, pretending to sleep, feeling the steady rhythm of my own heartbeat against the quiet hum of the night. Every shadow in the room seemed sharper, every creak in the floorboards amplified. I knew he would be leaving again. He always did. Always at the same time, slipping out into the darkness with the arrogance of someone who thought the world belonged to him. And tonight, he believed I was asleep. Tonight he would make his move, unaware that the smallest, most ridiculous twist of fate was waiting for him. I listened as the clock ticked past midnight. My hands rested calmly on the covers, my mind alert, but unmoving. When the front door clicked softly, signaling his departure, I stayed still. Not a sigh, not a movement. I let the silence stretch, savoring it. This was the moment where anticipation met preparation. Hours passed. I felt a strange cocktail of emotions, a tight, furious excitement mixed with quiet satisfaction. I smiled to myself, thinking about the absurdity of what was coming. The night stretched long, each minute feeling both endless and fleeting, like the calm before a storm in slow motion. Then the first hint of chaos arrived. My phone rang, sharp, urgent, and full of panic. I picked it up casually, letting the caller ID flash before my eyes. It was him. Sarah, help. I don't know what's happening. I feigned confusion, my voice trembling as if in shock. What do you mean? What happened? I can't. It's, I'm stuck. I. His words came out in a frantic jumble, broken and impossible to follow. I blinked slowly, then whispered, almost to myself, how strange. Behind my calm exterior, my mind was racing, replaying every step of the plan. I had anticipated confusion, maybe a little panic. But this was perfect. Within minutes, the distant wail of sirens pierced the night. The flashing red and blue lights reflected faintly in the windows, painting the room in surreal colors. Firefighters arrived, drawn by a call from a frantic neighbor, or maybe from him. I never knew. The scene outside was chaotic, but contained in its absurdity, grown men working meticulously to separate him from, well, his own folly. I stayed in the shadows, heart steady. Watching from a distance, I pretended to call emergency services myself, whispered reassurances to imaginary neighbors, acting every bit as shocked as the world expected me to be. But inside, I knew exactly what had happened. Every sticky detail, every moment of panic. every tiny, ironic turn that life had delivered to him so exquisitely. The humor of it was undeniable. The world had a sense of poetic justice I couldn't have orchestrated better myself. And yet, even in the absurdity, there was drama, the tension, the embarrassment, the realization that nothing he had done could protect him now. By the time the firefighters finally managed to free him, his face was pale, his expression a mix of disbelief, frustration, and shame. He didn't know whether to scream or cry. He didn't know who to blame, or if blaming anyone would even matter. I stepped into the room minutes later, pretending to have just discovered the mess, my voice trembling as I asked, "Are you okay?" He turned to me, eyes wide, speechless. And in that moment I allowed myself a tiny, private smile. Not cruel, not triumphant, just satisfied. Because finally, the truth had found its voice in the most absurd, ironic, and undeniable way possible. That night, as chaos unfolded outside and inside, I realized something fundamental. Revenge doesn't need to be loud to be effective. Sometimes it just needs to be precise, patient, and a little sticky. By the time I stepped into the living room, the chaos had reached its peak. Firefighters moved carefully around the scene, murmuring to one another, glancing at each other with eyebrows raised, some shaking their heads in disbelief. The neighbors had gathered in small clusters outside, whispering, pointing, their voices carrying the unmistakable hum of gossip. He stood there, sticky and red-faced, looking like a man trapped in a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. Every inch of his composure had vanished, replaced by confusion, shame, and an utterly human kind of panic. I approached him slowly, keeping my expression neutral, calm, the picture of concern. "Are you all right?" I asked, my voice soft, steady, as if I had just discovered a minor household accident. He looked at me, eyes wide, incapable of speaking. His pride was gone, replaced by the realization that the world, at least this little corner of it, had just witnessed him in his most vulnerable state. And worse, he understood who had orchestrated it. I knelt beside him, as if to help, patting his shoulder gently. "It's okay. Everyone makes mistakes." My tone was kind, almost tender, but my mind was racing with quiet triumph. Every firefighter, every neighbor, every whispering voice in the crowd, they were all witnesses. I could feel the comedy of the situation ripple through the room. It was absurd, ridiculous, and perfectly ironic. A man who had thought he could betray and deceive with impunity was now stuck in a moment of his own making, exposed and helpless. And yet, I kept my composure as if nothing had happened. The firefighters were patient, professional, but their eyes occasionally flicked toward me, probably wondering how such a simple domestic scene had escalated into something so absurdly complicated. And all the while, I stayed calm. Let them wonder. Let them talk. The truth of what had happened, and who had caused it, would reveal itself without a word from me. Privately, he knew. I knew. And the world, in its small, intimate way, had started to know too. This was the moment when the absurdity of his betrayal collided with reality. Every whispered word, every sideways glance, every stifled laugh from the neighbors added weight to the poetic justice unfolding before him. I didn't gloat. I didn't laugh. I didn't need to. The spectacle had delivered itself, and that was more than enough. My calm, measured presence contrasted with his disarray, making the truth undeniable. His choices had consequences, and tonight those consequences had arrived in full force. He opened his mouth to explain, to plead, to deflect, but the words faltered. There was no hiding behind excuses now. There was no turning back. He had walked into this moment believing himself clever, untouchable, and invisible. But visibility is unavoidable when the world itself conspires to reveal your secrets. I offered him a hand, the gesture of a supportive spouse, the perfect mask of innocence, and guided him toward the couch. "Sit," I said softly, everything's going to be fine. The firefighters murmured their instructions, neighbors whispered, and my husband sat, sticky and humiliated, unable to meet anyone's gaze. His reputation in that small circle had been reshaped in an instant, and I sat beside him, silent, calm, unshaken. It was funny, ridiculous, perfect, a little absurd, but it was also justice. I had not raised my voice, had not shouted, had not caused harm. I had simply acted. And now the consequences were visible to everyone who mattered. As the crowd thinned and the last firefighters left, I looked at him. His expression, though trying to mask frustration and shame, betrayed his understanding. He knew exactly what had happened. He knew it was me, and there was nothing he could do about it. And for the first time in months, I felt a quiet satisfaction settle over me, not cruel satisfaction, not gloating. Just the peace of knowing that truth had a voice, and that I had delivered it in the most precise, poetic way possible. Sometimes justice doesn't need to roar. Sometimes it simply needs to stick, literally, irrevocably, and memorably, for the whole world to see.
The house was quiet now. The sirens had faded, the neighbours had returned to their routines, and the absurd, sticky chaos of that night had become a memory etched into both our lives. I sat in the living room, calm, collected, and strangely serene. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of clarity I hadn't known I was missing. Filing for divorce felt natural, almost inevitable. I didn't storm into the courthouse with anger or vengeance in my heart. I didn't slam papers down or shout accusations. I moved with elegance, with the kind of quiet confidence that comes from knowing you've done what you needed to do. Everything was orderly, precise, intentional. He begged, he pleaded, he cried. He tried to twist words, to appeal to old memories, to remind me of the life we once shared. But I was done. Not just with him, but with pretending. I had loved deeply, trusted fully, and forgiven more than I should have. That chapter had ended. The glue incident, the humiliation, the public exposure. It was more than petty revenge. It was the final punctuation on a sentence I was no longer willing to let him write. I watched him crumble and felt no joy in his pain, only relief that the mask was gone. I had given him nothing more than the mirror of his own actions. And in that reflection, he saw exactly who he was and who he had become. This wasn't just about the lube, or the sticky mess, or the ridiculous spectacle. That was the comedy, the irony, the way life had given me an instrument of poetic justice. The real victory was mine, reclaiming control, reclaiming dignity, reclaiming the parts of myself I had given away to his lies. Days passed I walked through my home, noticing things I hadn't before. The sunlight through the curtains felt warmer, the air fresher. I didn't wake up anxious anymore, listening for the key in the door, or wondering what secret he might be hiding tonight. I slept, deeply and without fear. Friends noticed the change. They asked, in subtle ways, what had happened, and I smiled without explaining. Some things, I realized, didn't need words. Some victories didn't need applause. Some freedom simply needed to be lived. I found myself laughing again, genuinely, at little things, small absurdities, the kind of laughter that had been absent for months. The peace I felt wasn't dramatic or sudden. It was quiet, steady, like a river that has finally found its course after being dammed for too long. And I understood fully that revenge done right isn't about making someone suffer. It's about restoring balance, reclaiming power, and proving to yourself that betrayal does not define you. That night, the firefighters, the chaos, the sticky, ridiculous mess. It was just life giving me a tool to regain what I had lost. I was no longer the anxious, fearful wife waiting for secrets to unfold. I was the woman who had faced betrayal, acted with precision, and emerged whole. I had taken back control. I had laughed at the absurdity I had let go of fear, and in that release I found freedom. Sometimes the sweetest victories are quiet, deliberate, and utterly yours. I sit now in the quiet of my home, the kind of silence that isn't empty but full of clarity. The chaos of the past weeks feels distant, like a storm that passed and left the air clean and sharp. I think about love. The kind I believed in, the kind I gave, the kind I trusted would endure anything. Love without respect is a cage. You can build walls of devotion, adorn them with laughter and shared dreams, but without respect, those walls are fragile, and one day they crumble. I learned that the hard way. I loved him fully, and still he betrayed me. And yet, in that betrayal, I found a strange, fierce kind of clarity. Pain has a way of teaching you things that comfort never could. It strips away illusions, exposes the truth, and forces you to confront yourself. I took that pain, let it sharpen me instead of breaking me, and in return, it gave me something no deceit, no humiliation, and no heartbreak could ever take away. Power, my agency, my life reclaimed. I don't celebrate his downfall. That's petty, and I'm better than that. What I celebrate is my freedom, the small, absurd, perfectly poetic freedom to exist on my own terms, to trust my instincts and to know that I am stronger than anyone who ever tried to deceive me. The lube bottle, the glue, the chaos, all of it was just a tool, a punctuation mark on the story of my life that reminded me. Life has its own sense of irony. Justice doesn't always arrive as thunder. Sometimes it's quiet, sometimes it's messy, sometimes it sticks. And as I look out the window at the soft glow of the morning, I realize something essential. Liberation doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it laughs quietly at the absurdity of it all. I smile softly to myself, thinking of that night, of the panic, the sirens, the ridiculous sticky truth. And I know this, the lesson I carry is simple, yet profound. Sometimes the mess you make is exactly what sets you free. I take a deep breath, letting it fill me with a calm I haven't felt in years. I am whole. I am free. And the past, in all its pain, has only made me stronger. The story ends here, not with rage, not with triumph over someone else, but with quiet, hard-earned peace. The kind of peace that only comes when you take back what is yours, yourself.